All right, so this is the second part of the startup panel series. This is the investment community. So we talked to a few entrepreneurs in the last session, and I recognize some faces. My name's Joshua Corman. I'm the research director for the 451 Security Group's enterprise security practice. I'm filling in for Nick Selby, who could not come today. And since we've had a couple substitutions, I'll let each of the panelists introduce themselves, starting to my left here.
My name is John Harthorn, and I'm the founder and CEO of an organization called Mass Challenge. I think I'm the only non-investor person on the panel, but we run the world's largest startup competition. So it's open to anybody in the world with any idea in any industry. We're seeking startups that have high growth, high impact businesses, and we are giving away $1 million in prizes. The competition just launched, and the deadline for submission is June 11th. The top 100 teams, as judged by volunteer investors and lawyers and entrepreneurs from the ecosystem, will receive 3 months of completely free office space right around the corner on Fan Pier, gorgeous brand new luxury building, all free of cost, and then they would also be matched with top-notch mentors, and we have some of the best in the business, founder of Monster.com, people like Bill Warner from Avid Technologies. Desh is on our board, and we have a lot of Desh Deshmani and a lot of amazing people. So they get paired with some of the best mentors in the world for that 3-month period, work towards milestones, and then there's a final judging round, which with judges including Desh Deshpande, Josh Boger, Steven Schwartzman from the Blackstone Group, the CTO of Xerox, Chris Hughes from founder of Facebook and MyBarackObama.com, et cetera. And they will determine the 15 to 20 teams that will split the $1 million in prizes, and there will also be a bunch of in-kind support. And our goal really is to integrate the investors to the process so that we give out $1 million, but we actually unlock $25, $30 million in investment alongside that so that businesses can launch immediately.
Thanks. Peter Cooper. I'm with Incuto, which is it's a government-funded venture capital firm. It's kind of been a little bit of a shift lately, though, where it still does traditional VC investing. We're now moving more towards a, I would say, pay for R&D type of model, where we have companies that have compelling technology we think would benefit the intelligence community. We would work with the company directly to help adapt that technology from a commercial point of view directly into a government application. So that is appealing to a lot of companies. In fact, some of the panel members have companies that we've invested in or alongside of. And again, it's the idea of helping the government catch up to what's going on in the private sector. So it's only private companies. I run the security practice in particular. My focus, of course, is right in line with that. And if you have great ideas on how we can make the country safer, better, et cetera, that's what we're trying to do. So that's why I'm here.
Vishy Venugopalan. I am with Longworth Venture Partners. It's a local early stage venture firm. We invest in information technology startups, early stage, which is Series A and B primarily. And I spend most of my time looking at infrastructure software, which includes everything below the application layer broadly. So virtualization, cloud computing, including, of course, security. We like infrastructure software as an investment area because it's in a way it's an evergreen area, and there always seems to be yet another wave of innovation coming down the pike. So we're pretty excited. We have invested in the past in security and compliance companies, and we continue to actively look for investment opportunities, and that should just about cover it.
I'm Jeff Fagnan. I'm a partner with Atlas Venture here in Boston. Atlas is currently investing Fund 8 to $285 million fund. We've been around for 30 years. Information security is one of the areas of focus for the firm and one of the areas of focus for myself. I was a Series A investor in a company, Data Power, which Eugene was just up here on the panel. It was a pleasure working with him, and he's right. He did all the hard work with that company and deserved a ton of attribution. I was a Series A investor in a company called Bit9 for endpoint security, Series A investor in a company called Veracode, which some of the prominent people are affiliated with around this conference. I'm involved in a couple stealth startups that deal with security on the consumer and on the enterprise side, and continue to look at this space. I think that one of the topics today will be how do you build really big security companies. I think it's been challenging, but nevertheless, I think there's a need out there in the market, and I remain focused on it.
Hi, I'm Maria Serino, and I'm a partner at 406 Ventures. We're an early-stage technology venture capital firm located about a quarter of a mile from here. So I want to thank the organizers for making this so convenient. Like Jeff, I invest in a lot of security deals. I actually came to this by being a security entrepreneur and operator, having started a company called Gardent back in 2000, wound up selling it to VeriSign in '04, and then worked with Jeff to help get Veracode started as well. I'm also an investor in Bit9. Jeff and I actually spent a lot of time together. And I'm also invested in a company called Memento, which is a fraud company located up here in Burlington. And like several of my fellow panelists have mentioned, I really enjoy the security space. I enjoyed it both as an entrepreneur and I really like it as an investor. It is an evergreen area. It's an area that attracts some of the most brilliant entrepreneurs in the world. And I think having the right business model around a really interesting security technology can make all the difference. So delighted to be here.
Okay, thank you. So we had a pretty bad year last year as overall in the industry, specifically in security. Many people said that IT security was recession-proof. Upon further reflection, it really looks like compliance-mandated security was really recession-proof, and things like PCI and other derivatives really buoyed the spending. So could we kind of do a compare and contrast on how is the investment climate attitude? Is it bearish? Is it bullish? Between, say, pre-2009 and now? What's it before and after? Why don't we start on the end?
So a couple of observations. And this is kind of going back, sort of 2000 was a great time to start a company, right? Money was flowing. You could be a person like me that at that time couldn't spell security, and you could get money from just about anybody you wanted. And there were a lot of security companies that got started, 99, 2000. Then, obviously, the world changed. Tech took a big hit. VCs sort of looked at the space in general and said, oh, you know what? We made a terrible mistake. We overfunded this category. It's too crowded. There's too many players, competing in the same spaces. And so for a while, there was a really big pullback, right? So 02, 03, 04, tough time to get a lot of new security companies going. Then, it seemed that there were some bright spots in 04, 05, 06. You did see some interesting companies start to come on the landscape. And I would say, in the past, year to 2 years, security by and large has been, I don't know if I would call anything recession-proof, right? But security companies have been oddly advantaged in an economy that has forced companies to do more with less. In particular, Google China hack, a bunch of the very prominent things that you all are intimately familiar with have forced companies to wake up and say, we can't continue to take the same approach. Knocking our head against the wall, expecting things to change, doing the same things over and over again is a definition of insanity. And so companies really did, for the first time, wake up, reach out, embrace new technologies. And every single one of our security and fraud portfolio companies has been highly advantaged over the last 12 to 20 months. And all three of them had record years, in a time when other companies were struggling, because they happen to be market leading, have innovative technologies, and now they have demand in the market that before they were trying to create, and now that demand curve has switched. So I actually think, and we've seen this in other recessionary periods before, great companies emerge and can be built during very tough climates because those tough times force people to do different things. I don't think it's so much the recession as it is that it's been an unprecedented time for security attacks. And that's calling for a very, very different set of approaches, and that's when companies turn to startups and early stage companies versus the status quo.
Okay. That's a great point. As a follow-on to whoever wants to come on next, is that universally true? Is it rising all ships, or are there specific topics that are doing better in the wake of Google China attacks or compliance? Are there brighter spots and darker spots out of the, I think it was a staggering 70 different markets I tracked when I was at IBM, 70 security markets, which is, according to most of the buyers, way too many. So are there specific focal areas that are doing better now, or is that a universal statement that they're all doing better?
So again, just speaking from my portfolio, so fraud is doing extremely well, right? In a recessionary period, there's a lot more disgruntled people than usual. And so there's a lot more fraud that gets committed. So people who have, better mousetraps to stop fraudsters are doing well. I think endpoint security, is ripe for a complete and total reinvention. Companies, if you ask anybody how much they've spent in the last decade on endpoint security, namely antivirus, because that has been the predominant endpoint security for a decade plus, they'll tell you in some cases tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. Ask those same companies if they feel that their security posture is any better today on the endpoint than it was 10 years ago. The answer is no. And so there's no question that the smartest companies on the planet are absolutely taking a dramatically different approach to endpoint security. And they will not end this year with the same endpoint security strategies as they had 3 months ago or 6 months ago. So to me, those are two of the big areas.
Great. Peter?
Yeah, I think the recent time I'm wearing a suit and tie. I never wear a suit and tie except at weddings and funerals and going to see the CIA. That's when I also wear a suit and a tie. So I got back from Langley today, or actually McLean, Virginia today, and funny enough, I think the CIA and all the money we're spending on intelligence, that's great, but on security, they still have the same problems that corporate America does. They still have an endpoint issue. They still have attacks, or they still worry about attacks. And I think, to be my usual controversial self, I think the problem is we got a big wake-up call with Google, and that, guess what? Current solutions like antivirus clearly don't work. Everybody in this conference knows that, but now the guys that are in, the C-level executive offices are starting to wake up to the reality of, oh, what do you mean our Symantec isn't getting it done? Even though they're spending, $7 to $8 billion a year on AV, for example, that's now bound to also the crap that doesn't work either. It's a frustrating thing. Now you combine that, Maria was talking earlier how the early 2000s were the boom times in a way for startups. The latest VentureWire data states point blank that in 2009, the venture capital levels of investment in security were half of that level as 2005. So we've got a really interesting dynamic going on. We've got, clearly we're getting owned or getting our ass kicked all over the place. We've got a depletion to literally a 50% or less funding level currently, and yet, where is this void going to get filled? And I was here last year as the keynote speaker, and I said point blank, it's a great time to start a security startup. As Maria said, and I totally agree with Maria, in a recession, you've seen some of the strongest companies in the world come out, Microsoft, Oracle, et cetera. Those were recessionary 80s companies that came out and dominated. So I think from that point of view, security now, if you can get it going, and the cost to get a security startup is less if you can rely on cheaper ways of getting development done, et cetera, it's a fantastic time to help solve this problem, because clearly there's still a need.
We are going to take audience questions and whatnot. There's a microphone somewhere. So while we're waiting for the mic, anybody else on the panel want to disagree or add to what we've just been discussing?
I would just note that I think security is a great space, and it's going to continue to grow. I mean, the world is just increasingly digital. The economy is almost entirely reliant on a digital infrastructure, and that's just going to increase. Like there's no going backwards, right? Increasingly, appliances, everything is digitized. Privacy is going to remain a huge concern. So I think it's a great space to be in. In terms of as an entrepreneur looking out at a company that you might want to start, I wouldn't necessarily focus on targeting a growing sector of the market. I would focus on what you care about and what you're good at. Right? And if you're passionate about your startup, that's the surest way to make sure that you're going to win. And don't try to predict the market too much, except to, obviously, it may not be the best thing to go into a startup related to creating horse and buggies, right? Like certain things are certainly dying and out of vogue. But in general, this is a huge growing space. And if you're passionate about what you do and you're good at it, go for it.
So, Andrew, you had a question for Peter?
Hello. You were saying that now is a good time to start a company and to get venture capital. 5, 10, 15 years ago, it was mostly, correct me if I'm wrong, people that were starting companies out of their garages, first companies that they've ever done, and they're going for it. Are you seeing a lot of that still, or is it mostly people that have been through this venture process, had a company, sold it, started another one, did the process, sold it, and then is going into like a second, third, or fourth round as a new company?
Yeah, I don't know if that's if you guys want to jump in, it's not a me question.
Yeah, I think IT security has definitely been one of those spaces where you have serial people that, they did one startup in security, they did another startup in security, and they kind of know the space, and they know the players, and they know the lingo. I've actually been somewhat disappointed that I haven't seen as many new, younger entrepreneurs with really innovative, security ideas. And I think, the consumer, venue is ripe for innovation, and I haven't seen as much of that. But I don't think as far as getting funded, I don't think it really matters. I think if somebody has, a really strong idea, and I think if they can show some, customer demand and pull and an interesting, piece of technology for a market, look, I think right now, I think it's a great time to start a security startup. I think the only flip side of it is I think that it's harder today to get something started in security because I think there's a little bit of apprehension from investors on, can you build something big? I think for a long time you saw, as soon as something had a spot in the market and showed innovation and had like half a dozen customers, it would get picked up for 100, 150 million, 200 million dollars by, Cisco or CA or, Checkpoint or other. You don't see those technology tuck-ins today at those type of multiples. I think technology tuck-ins is a commodity today, and especially there's an overabundance of supply on the technology side to those corporate buyers. So I think you have to be prepared for a really long-term journey of building a real company. And building a real company means, 7 years and getting that to, $50, $100 million in, bookings and revenue and being prepared to go long. And I think that's where, and the buyers, it's tough. Symantec, McAfee, Cisco, they own the channel, and you better be willing to go build a big enough piece of business to go compete there.
So is that the stage of companies you invest in? People that can show you they have traction, they paint the billion-dollar market for you? Or are you going for earlier stage that are like, look, we know we can get into a, $100 million market, or even smaller, but we know there's potentially breaking out? So what kind of things are you looking at that you're investing in?
I'll answer quickly. I think it's all over the map. I think that we'll do a seed investment for something that you think could have potential to, if you demonstrate, some science or some technology or some market adoption. But generally, for us, if we do not think a company can be, a $250, $500 million market cap opportunity, either by acquisition or IPO, it's a really tough thing for saying we should make an initial investment, whether it's a seed or a Series A.
Just to add on to that, I think the answer is it does depend. It really depends on what the idea is. It depends on how big we think the company can be. When we were working early on with the founders of Veracode, there was no customers. Right? There was nothing but some interesting technology that still needed a lot of work and a new business model, in order to become the company that it is today. But we happily embraced that because we believed that it was a revolutionary technology that was going to change the way people did a lot of things relative to code assurance. And we helped, fill in, the blanks that those folks didn't have. So, and then in other situations, we need to see more proof. So it really does depend.
Yeah, let's work Vishy in here. It was interesting. Goldman Sachs does their annual survey, and a couple of years ago there was this great quote that said, "I spend more time managing my vendors than I do my solutions." And I think that really started a pivot where people had way too many security vendors, and there was a push to make security a feature of common infrastructure. The biggest security companies right now are IBM, Cisco, Oracle, CA. They're infrastructure first, and they're baking security or acquiring security companies in. So as a counterpoint perhaps, or maybe a different investment strategy, those tuck-ins might make more sense. So from an infrastructure perspective, how are you viewing things?
So I was actually just about to add that, over time as, very well, great descriptions of the changing security investment climate. The fact of the matter is that there's just more and more of an installed base in technology, and any new sort of security solution, not just security, anything else for that matter, needs to come in and justify how it fits into the existing picture. Like you can't just come and assume a blank slate as you might have in the past. So it's definitely more challenging, and possibly it points towards smaller businesses. Just from that sort of macro picture. But from an infrastructure point of view, we're, we continue to look at secure. So we just invested in a cloud endpoint management company called Viewfinity, and they don't explicitly have a security play, but they are going after the mid-market and the SMB sector, and what they are doing is they're basically partnering with a whole bunch of explicitly security vendors to offer a platform, something that sort of fits together to their customers. So we really are seeing security as a form of infrastructure management. And as new infrastructures come out, cloud, software as a service, and virtualization broadly, security is yet in. I mean, not to sort of downplay it, but can occasionally be seen as yet another checkbox you need to take care of when you're managing the platform, the new emerging platform as a whole. That would be my perspective.
I think that's, if I can jump in real quick, it'll address the startup thing. I mean, I think infrastructure change is going on with virtualization, right? Private cloud, the hybrid, the public cloud, et cetera. Whenever there's disruption, there's always opportunities for little guys. So trying to compete against Symantec for a cool new AV is a bullet in the head, easy enough call, right? It should be a bullet in their head too, but that's another issue. If you can find a way to enable cloud, that's a silly thing to say, I get it, but you know what I'm getting at, right? There's a way to help security in the cloud environment as people are shifting. So in other words, if you could help people manage a private cloud to a public cloud bursting situation, for example, right? That would be hugely valuable to any of the big banks, any single one of them to talk to you. I would probably want to talk to you. If you want to enable anything within the private cloud right now, I definitely want to talk to you because there may be 3 or 4 companies that have a clue about how to talk about virtualization from a security point of view, let alone do anything about it. And none of the public guys can today. None of them, I don't care what they tell you, they don't know what virtualization means from a security point of view because they can't see it, right? VM to VM transactions, they have no idea. They're totally in the blind. They have no idea what's going on. So I guess I just got the plans. I'm a little fired up, but and I haven't immediately. You spend a couple hours with the government, you'll be fired up too. The aspect I'm getting at is where there's disruption, there's opportunity. And 2 things. 1, there's opportunity for anybody on this panel to invest in certain cases, as Jeff pointed out, it needs to be a certain size. However, if it's a little tuck-in type of thing, that might require a different way of thinking. You may not need a VC. Right. You may want to think about bootstrapping it or finding other creative ways of getting some funding going. And then if you only sell for $20, $30 million only, but you own a bigger chunk of the pie, that could be the same economic return or close enough to a company that gets bought for $250 million.
I think the only point I would add on is I think Peter said, find these new innovation areas, find verticals too. I think you'd be surprised at the amount of money there is in healthcare around security and how important that is if we're going to really see some of this healthcare convergence, with the information technology. Same with education. So don't be scared to think vertical. And I think too often you do not get paid for building horizontal technology. So think about the verticals.
Yeah, to the point about disruptive windows as well, a lot of my clients are the smaller innovators, right? So, and what they're seeing is it's not just technology disruption. Some of the bigger players that are more entrenched and have large install bases are not as nimble or agile in the licensing, on the form factor. So there's a tremendous amount of disruption on all the P's, right? Pricing, product positioning, et cetera. So it's not always a technology revolution. It's sometimes just being a little more nimble and a little hungrier. In fact, a lot of the open source communities getting into the cloud earlier because of licensing. That's basically about it. So you had a question, David?
I guess as an entrepreneur, it feels like there's a lot more catch-22s out there than normal. We get a lot of them back. It's a great time to start a company looking historically, but traditional venture levels have recovered a little bit, but not to the levels that they have historically. I think Josh's point was the original question I was going to ask around. We've got some very large companies that have have domain ownership in whether it's endpoint or Cisco and Juniper on the network, Symantec and McAfee and endpoint, and end users have become so accustomed to these tuck-in acquisitions that have gotten cheaper because of the economy. So as an entrepreneur, going and convincing them to put one new agent on the network or one new box makes it very hard to build a $250 million revenue stream because they've been trained by the big publicly traded boys that will be a free feature later in life. And so as an entrepreneur, it feels a lot harder to go and say, hey, I've got this great idea. The other things don't lined up with the tuck-ins becoming a $30 million thing. What are you seeing, and how are you coaching your companies to deal with that scenario? See, a Veracode is someone very different. A Bit9 is someone who's probably dealing with a lot of the pains from hey, this is going to be a feature of my AV engine.
So it's a really, really, it's an excellent question and it's a great point. But again, kind of going back to some of the earlier remarks. So one of the reasons we believe that Veracode is going to grow up to be a big, standalone, successful company, right? And there's a number of reasons. So, indulge me for just a second, right? One, it's a very, very big problem, right? So for anybody who doesn't know what Veracode does, Veracode has a very nice cloud-based automated platform where organizations can upload binary code and get back within a 24-hour period of time, no matter how much code they upload, a very comprehensive report, as if we had looked at the source, even though we've never touched it, showing where that code may contain vulnerabilities. This is a really important thing. If people can discover vulnerabilities and deal with those before they get exploited, you can avoid things like what China did to Google, allegedly. Not allegedly that Veracode can help you avoid it, allegedly what China did to Google. And so again, why didn't the world embrace the notion of code reviews, sooner? Because it's a really, really hard problem, right? And how historically have companies, dealt with this? Smart people. Go find me 10,000 people that can find security vulnerabilities and understand coding. You won't find them. There's like 600, in the U.S. When we were hiring them, I could only hire like, 20. So that was problem number one. Then the source code tools came along. And believe it or not, this is a very long-winded explanation. I am going to get to your exact question just in about, 10 minutes, so sit tight. So then the source code tools came along, and that was a better answer than humans, right, who could look at a few thousand lines of code a day. Well, against an application that has 100 million lines of code, what good is that? Great, source code tools. Who do you give them to? Developers. How do you know it's not the developer that's placing the backdoor? Because he's going to get paid a lot more by selling that backdoor to somebody than he is by developing for the next 100 years. So that's problem number one. You don't get to check a compliance box, right? And you've already heard that a lot of security spending is driven by compliance. This is true. Why? Because executives don't want to go to jail. They don't really care if they're secure or not. Two, and so yes, it solves some problem, but it doesn't at the end of the day really get the job done in a very effective way. The reason that Veracode got funded as a service versus a product, right? And by the way, the original notion for that company was as a product that would go up against source code tools, and it wasn't getting funded. Why? What were those guys hearing when they went and ran around and talked to a lot of VCs? You're late to the party, the source code tools are already out there. Yeah, so binary is interesting, so you can look at libraries, so you're a little bit better, but it's an incrementally better solution. It's not a revolutionary, sort of change the world, change the game kind of solution. Now all of a sudden stick that in the cloud. Every single hour of every single day, that platform gets smarter, right? It's Google-esque in terms of every scan it does, it gets more comprehensive, it's able to find more things, and it's more accurate. So now today it can blow away, any tool, that's out there. It is the absolute best way, quickest way, most cost-effective way to find flaws in software against a very big problem when the world is waking up and saying, oh my God, we got to start looking at our software, what do we do? But, the long-winded answer to your question is, as an incremental solution, it wasn't going to get funded, right? So if you have the core of something that's really interesting, think about that, extending that either by a different business model or, by leveraging a network effect or, something that is going to actually create a game-changing, revolutionary, not evolutionary, element. And that's the big difference. And a lot of people don't, sort of really don't seem to focus on that. And they, we see a lot of stuff that's sort of me too. It's like, it's better than the other 15 products that are in the marketplace. By the way, none of them has more than, $500,000 in revenue. That's not going to get funded. Did I answer your question?
Yeah, very paraphrasing. Veracode is doing something that there isn't a logical big infrastructure player that can take over. I don't know if it's open source tools, but right now, you're asking Veracode for big nine is a massive use man, you go, oh, we're going to do whitelisting, and all of a sudden sales cycles start disappearing. Versus Veracode doesn't have that same.
It's a great point, and I think that I underestimated, I think Highland underestimated, Kleiner and 406, we all underestimated that installed base of antivirus, how hard it is sometimes to displace. Because, what they have is they have this just money-milking cow there at the endpoint. And look, Bit9 has a fundamentally better way for endpoint protection. Full stop. You go out there and you talk to the customers, you talk to people who know it, it's a better way of doing it. But you know what it's taken? It's taken enough examples, and it's been a timing. It's been around timing of, seeing enough breaches. It's been about having enough customer credibility. And these guys are starting to crumble. But it is different. Veracode does not go in there and people do not have a preconceived notion or install base. And guess what? Symantec is saying, oh, we'll have that. That's in the next version. McAfee's like, oh, we have that. We just picked up a small little company for 20 million, so we're going to do that now. But after a while, the customers have not seen the solutions. The attacks keep happening. And now, these customers are falling one by one, big customers. So it's been a timing thing. But it is both journeys are hard because Veracode's creating a market. You're evangelizing and educating. That's difficult. You go tell people about application security and why this is important, how they do this way. Sometimes you get a blank stare. With Bit 9, you're going and changing this up, and you're challenging an installed base. They're both difficult. From our estimation, they were both huge markets to go after.
So I know Anton's been waiting patiently.
Can I just do one really, really quick follow-on? Which is that the other thing that both of those companies in particular have in common is what they do is really, really hard to do. Technically, very difficult to do, very difficult to get it right. It took a lot longer, than anybody in the company or anybody around the board table expected in order to pull that off technically.
And expensive.
And you know what? That's a really good thing. Right? That's a really, really good thing because to your point, why wouldn't the big guys just do it? Of course they will. Right? But they will do it, they will stumble, they will fall, they will pick themselves up, they will try it again, and that creates a really interesting environment when all of a sudden, it gets really serious and they have to say, we have to get this thing done right.
Anton?
So quick question. Would you guys favor a technology that sells to enterprises over the one that sells to SMBs when you fund? Or would you just look in general holistically at the business plan and stuff? So is there any kind of inherent bias that enterprise stuff would sell better, would earn more money, that type of stuff? Or not?
So I can chime in really quick on that. Traditionally, the conventional wisdom has been that the SMB is just harder to reach. But having said that, there's new and interesting ways, of new and interesting channels to reach them that have opened up. And there's definitely by far the interesting part of a lot of these issues is that the SMB market in many cases is completely a greenfield opportunity. So you don't have to compete with sort of necessarily any incumbents. You can sort of creatively craft your value proposition specifically for the SMB rather than saying we'll make your infrastructure safer and plug into XYZ infrastructures that are already in place, as might be the case with a large enterprise. You can basically go in and say, this is the threat, this is why you need us, and this is how you can get onboarded really quickly. And I mean, just the attractiveness of the greenfield, the fact that it's a greenfield opportunity is definitely quite attractive. Having said that, I mean, trying to reach them is definitely a big battle, and especially in security, as somebody just mentioned, 2 or 3 companies sort of own all the channels. So you have to really kind of be creative. But broadly speaking, look at Longworth, we don't necessarily have a bias towards one or the other. It all really depends in the context of the deal, whether not only the go-to-market strategy makes sense for that particular class of customer, but also whether the team has the right DNA to go after those particular things. I mean, for example, if we run into a team that has basically spent most of their careers in large enterprises with sort of large, expensive direct sales models, and now they're out to create some kind of tool which needs to be self-service, downloaded off the web, and just kind of self-installed, coupled with very sort of web-savvy marketing. I mean, there's a disconnect there. We don't necessarily, we may have a hard time getting convinced that the team has the right DNA to go after the market strategy that it's proposing. So basically, I would say, in summary, it's pretty situational, depends on the deal.
I think the SMB space is really interesting, and I do think it's greenfield. I think what I find is on the SMB side, it's more about business model innovation. You better know how to get to those customers in a very efficient, cheap way. If anybody knows Acronis, which is a company that does disaster recovery, I mean, they licensed $30,000 worth of software, and then they just figured out how to boiler room. This is the model. You don't call customers that don't look like this. Rinse, repeat, rinse, repeat. And that's the model a lot of time with SMBs. It is self-service. It's an upsell. With telephone. I mean, the guys from Viewfinity that Longworth backed, they did a company called Exosoft, which was exactly that. Didn't have a single direct selling body in the company. And I think on the SMB side, that is what you have to figure out, is how to manage that funnel from the front end to getting customers through to the self-service, to the upsell, to the telesales, to everything. And it's a math model that makes sense. And then I think on the enterprise, I do think it is more around innovation at a technology level than, sure there's the business model, the cloud stuff, but I do think the difference that we see is on the SMB side, it's much more about the business model and the customer acquisition.
So I'm not sure when they're going to cut us off, but I want to throw a Molotov cocktail, and I also want to pull back in our contest here. But a few of us in the room have been in a series of debates about PCI or PCI and its facsimiles and copies, and we've been talking about, is PCI the No Child Left Behind Act for security? And what we're seeing is, out of those 70 markets I mentioned, about 8 of those categories are going to get you fined if you don't do them. So it's kind of a suck hole of time and budget. And those categories are fine, but it's distributing the economics of the system differently. Is that going to commoditize this space? Is it going to stabilize this space? Is this a good thing or a bad thing? In general, we've basically found that it was a godsend during the bad economy because it buoyed certain categories of spending. But we're also concerned because some of the more innovative folks that are actually handling state-sponsored attacks or advanced things like APTs. Oh, by the way, every time you say APT, God kills a kitten. But some of these more advanced threats, these innovators had a very, very tough 2009 because they were considered discretionary. So the Molotov cocktail is a compliance culture a good thing, a bad thing, and how do we protect against it misdirecting innovative VC dollars? Anyone? The quiet participant?
Well, I think there's feedback loops to this. So in a recessionary time, the innovators that are most out on the fringe will tend to lose because that seems to be faraway benefits, and you will fall back to these regulated spaces that are requirements. So everybody will kind of retreat to the bare minimum, and that will tend to hurt the innovators. But what that also means is that the innovative groups at bigger companies tend to be shed as they seek profit high ground, and they try to get rid of sort of innovative products and services that might still be 5 years from producing, or 2 or 3 years from producing profits. And that pours more innovators back into the system. And that creates the next feedback loop where you now have many, many, many innovators that are focused on the fringe that don't have a lot to do except focus on the fringe and work together and innovate and come up with the next big thing. And so then you have this big ball of innovation that comes back into the system at the end of the recession, and everybody's looking around going, wait, where'd all my innovators go? Oh yeah, we laid them off. Now suddenly I need to buy that stuff. So I think there are these sort of looping, whirling kind of effects at play that are hard to predict, but I would say it's about time for the innovators on the fringe to sort of pick up and win over the next couple of years as people start to make more profit and look to acquire those innovators.
So first, a comment on PCI, right? It does more harm than good because companies that somehow magically achieve PCI, which is basically stumble across the room and do almost nothing, feel some false sense of security. So that's the first thing that's wrong with PCI. The second thing is, shame on any company who actually has a really legitimate solution that's either going to solve a big pain point, save a company money, provide them with a significantly higher level of security, and do so in a game-changing sort of way, who can't sit across the table from a customer and explain to them how they will be advantaged in terms of every regulation that they are trying to achieve, regardless of whether or not you are specifically written into PCI. And there's very few companies that aren't. Right? I mean, there really aren't that many companies at the end of the day, that, can rely solely and exclusively by saying, come with us and you check PCI. So I think that, the whole thing is a bit of a fallacy. I think it's just incumbent on great entrepreneurs to be able to weave compliance into a big part of the value proposition. If you are a security entrepreneur and you do not have a good compliance message, as part of your offering and your message, then you're going to have a problem, because it's not just PCI, it's compliance in general, and this has been going on now for 9 years, is driving security dollars. That's what is driving security spending.
Yeah, we say we now fear the auditor more than the attacker. And if you look at the mandated controls, they tend to be our most ancient and oldest controls against our most modern, sophisticated adversaries. So, anybody in the audience have questions? I want to make sure that we get to everything you wanted to cover. Paul Roberts. Someone have a microphone? Anton? Someone named Anton have a microphone?
Picking up on what Jeff said about opportunities in the consumer space, I would be interested in hearing the panel's opinions about mobile devices and mobile security. It seems obviously like a huge amount of adoption there. It's both consumer and enterprise, and yet clearly a change of paradigm from the endpoint and client-server world, where you've got more or less closed platforms, where you've got carriers who are intermediaries, and obviously diversity of platforms, operating systems to consider. So, area of opportunity. I mean, there have been companies who have been burned on mobile security big time. So, interested in your thoughts.
So this is an interesting one, right? One would expect to have seen a lot more activity in this space and much bigger companies, right? The biggest company in mobile security is F-Secure. And, they're still less than $100 million company, right? And they are a dominant player. Is wipe and kill all you need, really? Kind of hard to argue with that, right? I mean, who cares, right? These things are like practically disposable. So it's not, I've looked at a ton of stuff, but we haven't gotten there, for all the reasons that I'm sort of alluding to. So I haven't seen anything yet that we sort of take a step back and say, okay, this is the one.
I can tell you from our point of view, mobility is a top priority from a security point of view, as well as just from a management point of view, just a simple infrastructure point of view, right? So, unofficially, Cisco's corporate policy is if you take your phone to China and you land on the plane, throw it in a water bucket, because we don't want it back in our corporate environment. I'm not making that up. The issue of mobility, though, again, this is where I'm going to get frustrated by the powers that be. We're all talking about the channel semantic McAfee. Remember, those guys were touting how mobile's going to be this huge growth for them because they're going to put an AV engine in every single device out there. I'm like throwing up on these conference calls saying, you've got to be kidding me. So you've had this innovation dilemma because you've had the big guys telling the end user, oh, we got you covered with AV, which, by the way, didn't work to begin with, let alone on a small device. Of course, there's an issue with, I wonder if Verico doesn't angle here, Maria, the code itself on these mobile devices. Does everybody think their iPhone apps are all legitimate? You do. Fantastic. I want to hang out with you guys later. What's the rough number? How many iPhone apps are compromised? 10%? 20%? I don't think those are exaggerations. So it's just, comes down to fundamentally the same old problems, right? And the one thing on PCI I will throw in, and I agree. I think Maria started off with, I think Maria or Jeff, whoever said that it's more bad than good. The more bad, no question. The little good, maybe just awareness. And the really bad, possible good side is that my friends down in DC are getting all fired up to get more serious about legislation, which is usually bad. But if code developers start thinking about they might be liable for a change, that could be good. Stop writing crap code would be a really good starting point for half of the problems, if not 3/4 of the problems we have.
So there was a question back there, and then the question I'm going to ask the rest of you to go down the line is, what's the one topic you're most excited about and would love to invest in? But in the back there? All right, the question was, why would I not wish to speak with you?
Fear of rejection? Do you fear rejection? I don't know. This is the basic thing. People say all the time, it's so hard to get meetings, it's so hard to get meetings. My email's on the website. It's not hard to get meetings.
Oh, how much of the company do you
What
want?
is it that you do? Maybe none.
Okay.
No question. So I mean, the answer again is it depends, right? It depends on what you're doing. It depends on how much money you'll need, right? You know, one of the reasons 406 exists is that we watched other firms in town get really large over, you know, the last decade. And a large firm, it becomes tougher and tougher to do small bets, you know, in little companies. And so, I mean, I know as an entrepreneur myself, I was encouraged to take a lot more money than we needed. And it really wasn't related to what the VCs thought we would need. It was related to the size of those funds. And so, you know, as a smaller fund in town, we're very happy, you know, writing smaller checks. We can make money doing that, right? The economics work for us and on behalf of our investors, right? Because, you know, the people who give us the money are pension funds, endowments, et cetera, et cetera. So it really does depend. And, you know, again, you know, that whatever that percentage is, you know, it's related to, you know, how much money you're going to get, you know, how much work you need, how much time we think we're going to be in the investment, potentially how competitive, you know, the situation is. So it really does depend. But at the end of the day, you know, it's got to be a fair deal, because a big part of how we measure ourselves is, would this entrepreneur work with us again at the end of the experience, right? And if at the end of the day you feel like it was unfair, we stole your company, we didn't add any value, you know, we're going to be in this business for a very short period of time.
So as the only non-VC up here, I might be the only person who's actually well positioned to answer this question. So I would say, honestly, you don't really want to talk to any of these people about investment unless you need to. And that's the key thing, is that you go, literally, no, but VC is like, it's very expensive money, right? It's very expensive money, but there are some businesses that you cannot grow without that money. And if you're one of those, then that's your option. But you essentially reach out, not, I wouldn't say in desperation. These are smart people and they have great connections and they can give you good advice in addition to the dollars. But if you come to them to ask for money, it's understandable that you don't have other options. And so they're going to extract value out of you. I mean, if you can grow your business with friends and family money, with customer money, with angel money, with loans or grants, it's far less expensive than venture funding. But you can't grow as quickly because you're probably not going to get $3 million of grants. You're probably your family doesn't have $3 million to give you to grow your business rapidly and build out your sales force, right? And they don't have the advice and the customer support. So basically, if you're looking to grow rapidly and you need a lot of money to get there, you probably have to talk to venture. If not, go somewhere else. That's what I would suggest.
I don't know if I agree with that entirely. I think, I'm not really a VC, so let me back up. Yes, I agree that a lot of VCs aren't worth the pound of flesh, right? A lot of guys don't know what they're talking about. But, you know, for example, I've known Maria Serino, who sits at the end of this panel right here. Good friend of mine. I've known her since she was at Garden. She's the CEO of Garden. If you think that Maria can't offer you really good advice on how to run your company, I'd laugh at you. If Maria wants half your company, I'd probably laugh at her. Playing both sides. But, you know, is Maria's value, you know, worth something? Absolutely. I mean, to sit there and think that you guys, you know, independently, any one of us can figure this all on our own is kind of foolish. You may have a great technology, a great idea, but go-to-market's an issue. I mean, Jeff mentioned Acronis. That went from $10 million to over $100 million in 3 years in sales, right? Yes, they needed money help from the capital point of view, but they also helped a lot of help in refining that model. They aced that code, quote unquote. They aced their model and became an insanely fast-growing company. Now, if you're lucky enough to be able to have access to entrepreneurs or other folks that can add that value for you, that strategic value, that board member, hey guys, I think we should do this. What do you guys think? Then by all means, if you don't need funding, then sure. But there's dumb money in VC, which by the way, half the VCs are going to die over the next couple of years in my opinion, because they are dumb money or they're just going to get tired and old and fat and go away. And there's the other ones that are smart and add value, that are going to be worth you talking to. So I won't endorse that you need to talk to VC, so I don't entirely disagree by any stretch, but I don't want it to be at this binary, decision tree where you say, I'm either not going to talk to VC. There are times that it absolutely makes sense in my opinion, and there are times that it absolutely does not make sense. Well, I don't think I made it fair play.
I must say 15 times a week, take as little money as you can, but as much as you should, so as not to sub-optimize on your opportunity. And I think that's what Don was saying, and I very much appreciate Peter's remarks. But I mean, we say this all the time.
All right, so I think we're up at the end of our time, so I'd like to ask each of you, what's the one thing you'd love to see or love to invest in, and you could, and maybe an anti-lesson as well, like please don't do this, please do that. So a do and a don't for the audience from each of you. Anyone?
I'll start at this end. So, I mean, I'm not an investor, so it's a slightly trick question for me. But in terms of like companies with which I would like to work and whom I would like to support most, for me, it's all about passion. I'm not as smart as these guys. I can't predict which markets will win, which companies will win. But I'll tell you that the clearest thing that I've seen is that it's really hard to launch a good startup. And if you don't care about what you're doing, you're just not going to make it. There's too many hurdles. There's too many challenges. You've got to work with customers, technology, funding, team members, rapidly changing marketplaces. And unless you can get up every day and be excited to work on your project, sooner or later, you're going to drop out of the race. So for me, the key thing that I'm looking for is passion and excitement about what they're working on. I would say, for the what not to do, I would say it's pretty much the opposite of that, right? So don't just try to game the system and predict where the growth market is and do something because you think it's a hot fad topic. Just focus on doing something that you believe in, that you think you can be the best at, and go for it. That's what I would like to see.
So going down the line, I mean, my big thing is data-focused security, or transaction, if not data. I think that's where we should have started from an industry, and we went the other way around. We started the top going down to the bottom. It's all about the data. So that's my kind of hot topic in my mind. How do we work on that problem? So from a do, I totally agree with your concept of passion, et cetera. And I would say, one thing that harps on Maria said also is do be incredibly prudent with your money. A lot of guys just don't get there, or have to do some very painful things to their companies because they don't think, or they don't think far enough ahead that it was going to take them longer than they think. It's like any project you take on, it takes twice as long and twice as much. So if you spend half as much and you spend twice as many hours in that garage, you might just get there. And the don'ts is, don't give up. I mean, security is a lot of things that VC levels are half of what they were 5 years ago. That's very disheartening. It is a crappy economy. That is very disheartening. But I can't agree more. If you have the passion, don't give up. Just keep going. And if you're onto it, it'll pay off very handsomely.
From our point of view, some areas we're really excited about are, like everybody else, cloud, but not necessarily where the hype is happening, or where the sort of Twitter conversations are happening, but more like on the side of virtualization and software as a service, as sort of larger macro trends that have been going on for some time, perhaps even longer than this whole cloud conversation. So cloud. So from that point of view, sort of anything that uses characteristics of these infrastructures to extract new efficiencies in existing services for which there are existing customers. That's definitely one area we're really excited about. And in terms of don'ts, nothing really strikes me as a bad idea. You just have to convince the other person to see it your way. And if you can't, well, then you find somebody else, right? So, and in terms of tips, I would agree. I mean, echoing a bunch of comments made earlier. Think creatively about how you can get additional runway. You may have the best technology, but it's oftentimes the business model that will, that will propel you towards sort of either greater runway or eventually a bigger exit. So think creative.
So a former VP of engineering from Google told me that Google knows any person, no matter what computer they're at, if they do 4 searches, that they can identify that's Jeff Fagnan and Jackson Hole, even if I'm on the Sheraton computer. I'm a big believer in the next wave of identity and privacy for the consumer. With targeted cookies, with the demand side platforms, with that as soon as you do any sort of web search, that Yahoo emails you a direct offer with just the exact thing you were looking at. your information is being violated. And that information belongs to you. And I think it's time as consumers, through Consumer Bill of Rights and civil liberties, that belongs back in the power of the consumers. And so I'm very big in anything that starts to really free us and thinks about, privacy and identity and smart ways to do that. Because right now, I think you're being hacked and you're being stolen.
So, again, I'm hoping that the next big ideas are going to come, from people out here, not people up here. So, the things that I will be looking for are, big market opportunity, not incrementally better, but, truly completely different revolutionary approach. Nice business model, sort of wrapped around that. And, today, nice sort of equals cloud-based, subscription-based revenue. But it should be appropriate, right? We have a lot of people come in with things that there would be, as a customer, I would have no motivation to do anything other than buy a license. And I said, why is this cloud-based? And the answer is because that's what we think you guys like. So it should actually really tie to, again, the benefit that customers are deriving. But if you can tie those two things together, that's great. Secure data anywhere, regardless of type, regardless of platform, regardless of infrastructure. That to me is a pretty exciting, kind of next frontier opportunity. And I've seen some things that are circling, but nothing that's really landed yet. But I'm spending a lot of time in that area in particular. And I guess in terms of what not to do, we work with people very, very early on, so we don't need fully baked presentations. We're highly collaborative. We can kind of help you sort of pull the whole thing together. But at the end of the day, I would hope that before you come and talk to us, you're going to do enough research, enough homework, really understand your market, your prospective customers, because you've gone out there and you've talked to some, so that after we leave the meeting in 15 minutes of cursory web research, we don't find out more about your company at that stage than right? I mean, and this happens a lot. And I'll just think, well, wait a second, maybe I missed something. Call it up. Oh, I didn't realize that, right? It's like, okay, well, that took 10 seconds, on Google to figure that out. So we have a lot of respect for people who have really kind of tried to talk themselves out of this before they come and have anybody else try to talk them out of it.
All right, I'd like to thank our panelists. This has been the investment view of of startups. We are the entrepreneurs view prior. I'm sure we can continue these dialogues over cocktails for the rest of the evening. Again, I'm Josh Corman from the 451 group, and thank you for your time.